Andy Burnham has pledged to continue the UK's unwavering support for Ukraine ahead of a meeting with President Zelensky on Monday. Volodymyr Zelensky will become the Prime Minister's first international visitor since he took office a week ago. Let's speak to our correspondent Paul Adams, who's in Kiev. What will it mean to President Zelensky to be the first international visitor to Andy Burnham, Paul?
Well, look, this is clearly an important relationship, one that is developing all the time. Britain is among Ukraine's strongest allies. It is also, of course, with France, one of the countries that has expressed a willingness to put troops on the ground in Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire, something that, of course, remains a rather distant prospect. I think the thing to remember, Martin, is that President Zelensky is on his way to the United States. So for all the warm talk of the relationship, the discussions of the exchange of new technology that we're going to hear in the course of the day, President Zelensky's mind is very much focused on meeting Donald Trump tomorrow in Washington. And the possibility, and it is only at the moment a rather remote possibility, that we're going to see another diplomatic push to try and resolve the war here.
That involves leaning harder on Russia. Why might the conditions be ripe for that to generate some progress?
I think President Zelensky's view is that the conditions are riper than they have been for some time. Most Ukrainians believe that Ukraine is certainly not losing this war and may actually be winning it. And if you look at the kind of long-range strikes deep inside Russia, Ukraine is inflicting a great deal of economic damage on Russia. It's also, we've seen recently attacking oil facilities. That has led to concerns of countries like Kazakhstan, which need the Black Sea oil facilities to export their oil to the world markets. Kazakhstan's leader was talking to Vladimir Putin just the other day and saying that, frankly, in his view, the war should end and that he didn't really understand why it was continuing. There is a sense that Vladimir Putin is under a great deal of economic pressure at the moment and maybe reaching some kind of decisive point. And I think President Zelensky wants to go to Donald Trump and say, you know, a year ago you said I was weak and I had no cards. Look at me now. I am driving the course of this war. President Trump likes a winner. We know that. And perhaps as a result of that kind of changed dynamic, we might see President Trump re-engaging in some meaningful way.
How likely, though, is it that President Trump will insist that NATO does more?
I missed the second half of that question, Martin. Could you repeat it?
Yes, of course. How likely is it, though, that President Trump will insist that European members of NATO do more?
They are already doing more. I mean, there's very little in the way of military assistance coming directly from the United States. And in fact, even the scheme that was set up last year, known as Pearl, which is the scheme whereby European and other non-American members of NATO buy American kit and then pass it on to the United States, even that accounts for a relatively small part of the equipment arriving here in Ukraine. This country is more and more responsible for its own military development. And that is a situation that is changing and evolving all the time. So in a way, that issue has been resolved. The question, of course, is that it is still Donald Trump who can exercise leverage and power and influence over Vladimir Putin in a way that, frankly, no other single leader or group of leaders can do. And so that is why, despite the question of military assistance, it is Donald Trump who President Zelensky really needs on his side.
Paul, for the moment, thank you. Paul Adams in Kiev. Let's speak to Dr. Hannah Shellis, Director of Security Studies at the Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism, which is a think tank. Dr. Shellis, welcome. We're seeing that President Zelensky is visiting London today. How important is the UK in the greater scheme of things when it comes to the Ukraine conflict?
It's not only about the Russian-Ukrainian war. It is in general, the United Kingdom is one of the top strategic partners for Ukraine. Let's not forget that just 2 years ago, we signed the 100 years partnership agreement, strategic partnership agreement. Ukraine doesn't have such agreements with any country around the globe. And as far as I know, the UK in such a format also doesn't have a similar agreements with other countries. So we know that definitely war and security and defense became now the core topic for our cooperation, but it's not just about the war, but about the long term. What President announced before his trip that we are going to speak about the drone deal, about the joint production of the missiles, about the technological cooperation, about the anti-ballistic missiles, European air defense shield. So something what is not built just tomorrow, but it is definitely important for the European security for the long-term perspective.
How helpful or otherwise is Donald Trump's approach to diplomacy, which he tends to see as a sort of business deal rather than anything else?
Partially, we were ready for this because it is not the first term of Mr. Trump. Definitely, a lot of things became much more crystallized in terms of the business approach, also because of the people around him. So I would not personalize it only to President Trump. Even the previous administration, he had a lot of specialists, foreign policy and security specialists on China, on Russia, on other countries. So now we see that, especially around the negotiations, especially about the crisis situation, he had his business partners helping with them. That's why we see this business approach much more present. It can be easier sometimes because you can explain pragmatically why it is important for the United States to support Ukraine, to support Europe. But at the same time, it is more difficult because these people don't have a long memory of the previous activities of Iran, of Russia, of other countries. So they don't understand how these countries are not reliable partners who can violate their agreements very quickly.
So just briefly, very briefly, how great is the danger then that diplomacy will only result in containment rather than victory for Ukraine?
That's why we are working with both. We are trying to assure that Russian Federation would not be able to continue the war. And for a long time, we are speaking, diplomacy is the must, but armed forces are the best allies.